Alright guys, little update for the channel for you. So this is going to be my new title page. It's going to be on all my videos. If you need this information, take a screenshot of it and you'll have it. So I constantly get questions about what axles are you running. I get Demon axles, that's what this video is all about. What tires, where you get your Aztecs, what's the promo code for this stuff. So it's all here on this one page. Who do you get your gear reductions from? Who do you get your arched arms from? How can I find them up to the Facebook page? It's all here. So this is a really good little useful tool that will hopefully save me from getting so many emails and messages from you guys. I like helping you guys out, but it gets a little overwhelming sometimes. So this page should help with that. Also, if you need more information that's not on this page, check the description for the video. You have to hit the little drop down underneath the title of the video, and there'll be more information there about this stuff, like how to actually, email these people, what their phone numbers are. If it's not already on the page, it'll be in the description. I'm going to use this as a chance to give you a summary of the video while this page is up on future videos. So it'll be a little summary, some information, and then I'll give you the video. This video is all about the new axles, how to install them, comparison, yada yada yada, tips and tricks. So it's probably useful for everyone that has a Rubicon and breaks a lot of axles, which is most of us.
Alright guys, these are the much anticipated Demon HD axles for the Rubicon. So as you know, there's not a whole lot of good axle options for the Rubicon, or there wasn't. The stock front axles pretty much always break, so I've been running Cobras on the front of mine. Problem with the Cobras is Cobra themselves will tell you that stock, or the HD Cobra axle, the like the $250 one, is a pretty outdated design, and the threads on it were too short, so you had to leave the nut off. And if you left the nut off, your nut would eat into your hub and you have issues. Also, the boots weren't very good. They were massive and they're decent, but the only other axle you could really get for the Rubicons are like the crazy expensive $500 Cobra King Cobras, and that's just too hardcore for most guys, and the axles are so big they don't fit with any of our arched arms. So really excited about these. I ran Demon HDs on my Can-Am and never broke any of the joints. Had some issues with the stubs on the Can-Am just because of the way the Can-Am front diff is designed. It was pushing my axle out. That wasn't really an axle problem. But I like the boots. So first impressions, like the boots. Front shaft diameter is huge. The rears aren't as big, but it looks pretty good. They look like factory bands and everything. I mean, that's kind of like what Honda uses. And so these boots should last pretty good. That's my one problem with the Cobra. You tear a boot on an expensive axle, it's kind of done. They came with a bunch of stickers and shit. It's cool. Really well packaged. They come with this flyer. I didn't even know this, but these axles have the HD axles have a 1-year warranty, and they also have a bunch of different lift axles and stuff. They also sell ball joints, which is kind of cool. Didn't know that. And then they have extreme axles. I think extreme axles come out for the Rubicon eventually, but again, those are going to be real big. They might not fit super well with the arched arms. I recommend for the Hondas anyways. They make wheel spacers, a bunch of other stuff. But the Mud Puppy promo code, which is MPuppy15, will get you a discount, 15% discount on most of the stuff they make, so that's really cool. And we're going to take all the stock axles out of the Rubicon and replace it with these, and we're going to do a comparison to show you the angles. Obviously this joint's angle is the one that matters the most because it needs to be, at full droop it has this angle and also has to steer, so we'll see the angle comparison there, and we'll check out the angles on the rear. We'll compare the lengths to stock. Really quality looking product. So we will do a full comparison for you, but so far so good. I'm going to show you how to change the axles on a Rubicon. It is incredibly easy with just a few tools. So this is this bike's got a 35% gear reduction, like a 2-inch front bracket lift, maybe like 2.25 inch. The custom one, it's a little bigger than a high lifter. And it's got my rear arched and raked arms, and the back is set up real aggressive. It's like 2.5 inches of lift in the rear, and it's got 31-inch Outlaw 3s on 16-inch super heavy, super wide wheels. So this is a pretty good axle test apparatus right here. So first thing you do, you take the shock off, take your tire off, which is either 14 or 17. Then you take the bottom of the shock off. It's a 14 and a wrench. Then you take your same 14, put it on an extension and wrench, and you take this and you kind of pop it off. You don't have to unbolt it, just kind of push it down a little bit, and that'll let you get these 2 bottom control arm bolts. So there's one, and now someone's gonna come bug me because they have nothing else better to do. And there's 2. So there's 2 ways to do this. Number one, the right way, my way, is what I just did there. You take off the lower control arm bolts. You can bust the lower ball joint, but then you run the risk of having issues with that ball joint spinning or whatever. So I don't do that. Okay, so now you remove
Move this cotter pin right here. Note, these are stock axles. This one's actually broken. The rest are clicking. They're all about wore out. Not stock, but OEM. So putting all 4 on here so I don't have to worry about this bike anymore because I got enough of my own stuff to work on. So that's a 30mm socket. So that's the only kind of special tool you need. That not every toolkit will have a 30mm. So take that off, bust it loose, and then put it back on just a little snug. I'll show you why we do that. We're going to use the hub as kind of like a slide hammer. So you pick your shock up and then kind of pull out on the arm, and that'll help you bust the axle out of the diff without having any issues. So they have one bad thing about Cobras and all those big axles are, if you try to yank the axle out of the diff, the axle will come apart and you'll end up with a cup and a shaft. These OEM axles don't do that, and I don't think the Demons are going to do that either, just looking at how they're designed. So gonna grab that, pop it, boom. You see how it's out of the diff now? So now, while that nut's on there, you want to pick this up real high and carefully take this out and move it to the side. This one's a little harder than usual because that axle's screwed up. And then zip off the nut that you already broke loose while it was all still intact. And when you slide your axle out, this brake rotor can fall, so don't have your toe underneath it. Slide that out and that's gonna stay. So there's the broken axle. Hasn't busted the boot yet, but this joint's locked up, the cage broke. So that's how you get the axle out. As you can see, that took like literally 5 minutes. So I'm gonna go grab the new axle and we're gonna put it back in. Also remember, on these machines, the short axle goes on the left side. That's because the diff is over to the left because the shaft comes from the left. So it's pretty easy to remember if you just look at it. While you're doing this, check that seal. I always clean that seal and make sure there's no shit stuck in it. But yeah, so we're gonna grab a new axle. Oh, both of these joints are screwed up. This axle's really toast. You can tell that the front axles are the front axles because of the way this axle looks. It's way bigger on the outer joint. And then if you compare the two of them side by side and you compress the bottom joint, it's pretty easy to see this is the short one. So this is gonna be the driver's side. Well, this is no driver's side on a four-wheeler. The left when sitting on the bike. So we do a shaft comparison. Pretty big difference in shaft size there. Obviously the black one's bigger. New super beefy Demon axle right here. You can check the part number. It's printed on the shaft. That's really nice. 3.5. That's the left one. So we're gonna install it. So unlike the Cobras, you can actually use this washer properly and everything fits right. So to install it, do everything in the reverse order. Install this through in the knuckle. Hold this and line it up. Slides right in. Once you get that in, put on your washer, your castle nut, and don't torque this yet. Just put it hand tight. Pick your shock up. One thing that helps that I do sometimes, I'll take the shock and bungee cord it out of the way. Not really required, but makes it a little nicer. Line that up. Careful not to damage the seal. And then once you get it lined up just right, do the same kind of deal to pop it into the diff. So what kind of helps is if you hold the studs and you rock it a little bit. So hold it up to where it's straight. And kind of rock it in. You're not really fighting in the studs, the splines at this point. There's a snap ring that retains it in the diff. You got to get that snap ring in. Boom, it's in. So now that you got that all the way in, you should have enough slack to get your lower control arm back into place without worrying about it coming out. So pull out travel. Taking off the skid plate's another thing you can do to help this, but I'm doing this the laziest way possible because that's how most of you will do it. So those are lined up. Put in your lower A-arm bolts. Okay, put in your shock bolt, the nut. I threaded that on a little too far. And that's pretty much it. So now you just gotta go around and re-torque everything. Axle, we're gonna do it with one bolt and one nut. Back axle is ridiculously easy. So the shock went on pretty easy, even with the lift, so that's good. That's a good check. Once we get it all bolted up, we're gonna see if there's any binding with the axle at full down travel with the lift. So that's something you always check too when you're installing an aftermarket axle, is you wanna make sure there's no binding. Because sometimes with a thicker shaft, which is great for not braking, it can actually mean that you have less down travel. But we will check that out. Get everything bolted in first.
Don't need the extension anymore. Yeah, so this thing's had a hard life. It's got a bracket lift, preload set maxed out, and it's on the heaviest tires and wheels you can pretty much get. So it's not surprising that it's only a year old and all the axles are shot. But so we're upgrading. A little 1/2 inch impact will save you a lot of time. So now we're gonna torque the piss out of this axle nut. Beautiful. And we're going to put our cotter pin back in. This cotter pin's pretty beat up. I should probably get a new one, but I'm not, because it doesn't really matter. Actually, we might get a new one. This cotter pin's about shot. Let's grab a cotter pin. Sometimes when they're this bent up, it's not even worth trying to straighten them. These axles come with new cotter pins, by the way. They're in the house. Okay. Look at that. It actually goes through the hole with the washer on. Just barely, but it's fine. So that's all it took to have the axles installed. So now we're gonna check steering. That looks good. No binding at full down travel. Let me go on the other side and spin the wheel, Robin. Wow, no binding whatsoever. So what you'll see if you have binding is that the A-arm will jump up and down as the axle binds on the bottom of this joint, and you'll see that joint kind of rock in the diff. So that's a really good sign for these axles, that even with a lift, full down travel, we're not having any binding or jumping or anything like that. Are stupid heavy. It's really just not the tire, it's the wheel too. Because the 16s are always going to be heavier because of the bigger wheel. And these are bead locks, and they're just a super heavy overkill bead lock because they're made for side-by-sides like everything else. So it's an overall giant pain in the dick. Always start your lug nuts by hand unless you're really good, and don't do that. All right, so there's one side done. Now we're gonna do the other side. Just repeat the same process. All right, so Demon versus stock. You see how much bigger the bottom cups are way bigger. The outer cups are about the same. So at full compression, the Demons are just a hair longer. So this is obviously the long side. So you got to compress the inner joints to really get this measurement right. Control the grease out of the way. And the Demons are just a little bit longer. Maybe a 1/4 inch longer. I'm out in the vise and crank it down. Then you can pull up on them. And as you can see, Demon is about 1/2 inch longer now. So that's good. That means they give you about a 1/4 inch more travel with this cup. And that makes sense because the travel is all in the inner cup, and these cups, the Demon cups, are longer. So that's good. So you get a little more travel with these axles. That'll help, definitely help with lift kits and stuff. So now we gotta do angle. I'll take the nut off. With the Demons, you don't have to run this washer, by the way. They give you a nice flange nut that's similar to the stock one. The Cobra HDs don't have that, and if you just put the hex on there, it'll eat into your hub. So a little bit nicer nut. That's a real thick washer. So if you're having a hard time getting the cotter pin in, do not have to run this. You're fine running just the nut. So let's test the angle on the front outer joints. That's the most important one. Okay, and the vise chucked up nice and straight. So there you go. You can see that you're getting a couple more degrees out of the Demon than you are. You can push on it real hard, yeah. So definitely a little more travel on the outer joint. That's good. A lot of times when you break a cage, it's because you maxed out. You were, in reverse, steered all the way, and you maxed out the range of travel of the stock axle, especially with the lift kit. So we'll tune a couple different spots just to get a good comparison. Yeah, the Demon definitely has more travel. Yep. So that's awesome. Let's check the inner joints. So the travel on the inner joints is dependent on where the axle is in the range of travel. So what I mean by that is when the axle's at full compression, you have less travel because at full compression, it's going to hit this cup earlier. So full compression, it hits there. If you let it come out, you can go farther. So we'll do, whoa, that thing has a lot of travel. That's way more travel than stock. Anyways, so if you come all the way out and down, all the way out and down, hold it. This one slid in. Okay, so that's identical. So same travel in the inner joint as stock compared to Demon, which is kind of what you'd expect, right? So it's a bigger cup, but it's also a bigger shaft, which means the shaft's gonna contact the cup a little earlier. And this travel right here changes depending on if it's in a groove with a ball or not, so you can kind of feel it max out. Same with the stock one. Cobras will give you more travel, especially the King Cobras, the double plunging, but I don't really like a double plunging axle unless you absolutely have to have it. Cobra themselves told me that when they were making my Polaris axles, they're like, you know, if we can avoid making it double plunging, we always do, because having this axle locked down means you don't have to have slip splines, and you don't get into the issue where this axle's binding when it's steering because the shaft's trying to slide in and out. So there's a reason most stock axles, including the ones on the Talon, are not double plunging. With a properly designed suspension system, you don't need that much axle travel. The only time you need double plunging is with a long arm kit that was designed on someone's back porch, and you know, you need a ton of travel because they didn't get everything quite right. So I don't think it's a big deal they're not double plunging. Double plunging is kind of a gimmick on a stock bike. That's definitely something that started with the long travel side-by-side. Ranked arms with the shocks kicked way out and cranked way up. So that's a lot of angle on those axles right there. They're both totally wore out. They pop when you turn and everything like that. The only reason they haven't exploded yet is because she rides it, not me. So let's do the back axles. This is even easier, guys. So pull off your lug nuts. Get that tire out of the way. A little different order operations here. Take your cotter pin. A pair of dikes are the only way to handle cotter pins, if you don't already know. Get that sucker out of there. Take off this nut. And I should say this is easy if you have a properly lubricated Rubicon. If you haven't greased the rear diff axle spline since you bought the bike, this might be a bit of a fight for you, but I'll give you a trick for that while I'm doing this. So undo your upper control arm. As you can see, this upper control arm looks a little wonky, and that's because this is the raked one. That falls out. It's actually a good step to do to loosen this up. Swing this out of your way. It takes like a second, and it saves you some time. I don't know about saves time, makes it less of a fight at least. Makes it easier. So loosen that up. Swing it up out of the way. Tighten it back down. You don't even need a bungee cord, it'll hold itself out of the way. And then just snatch, oh man, this thing is wore out. And just snatch that sucker out of the diff. And because I lubricated it right, it came right out. If it doesn't come right out, take out this bolt, bolt your knuckle back to it, and use the knuckle as a slide hammer to pop it out. As you can see, no problems there. Keep this thing well lubricated. So let's do a comparison with this back axle. You can see all the hot spots on this one. It's about shot. So full compression. Again, the Demon's about 1/4 inch longer. Full extension. Again, Demon's about 1/2 inch longer. So we're getting more travel. That's nice. The cups are real similar size. A little bit longer, a little more travel. The shafts are pretty similar size. Doesn't have all these goofy grooves in it. Maybe the shaft of this one's a little thicker. So let's do travel. So if we go all the way in. Oh wow, that's It's a lot more travel on the Demon. That's several more degrees. That's awesome. You go all the way out. Out travel. Demon is maybe like 3 degrees better. Okay, that's the inner joint, so we'll flip them over and do the outer joint. By the way, the outer joint's probably more relevant. That's the one that always breaks on Hondas. Seen very few people break inners. That's why Honda won't sell you a whole shaft. They just sell you an outer. So these don't travel, so you just push them over. Very similar. I'd say they're the same in the rear, which is okay because the rears honestly have enough travel stock for a 2-inch lift. We don't have a whole lot of issues with them. Yeah, same angles on the rears. So the back axles almost seem like a pretty serious Honda clone. And that's not a bad thing because the back axles, you know, I don't really break a whole lot of back axles on these. I break a lot of fronts. If I put the eBay special, you know, East Lake Inner Part crap, I break a ton of back axles, obviously. But they're about the same on the back axles. The reason I'm happy about that is because, like, if you get the King Cobras, this joint is so big it won't clear my arched arms. So I'll be able to install these on the arched arms without any mods whatsoever. They'll bolt right on without any grinding or any of that bullshit. So it's a great replacement. Also, if you put real big rear axles, like that big Rubicon I was driving for a while that had the turners, you'll find out that you'll start breaking rear drive shafts pretty quick and rear diffs. The axles are the design fail point. Anyways, so one thing about this company, oh, you got to grease the sucker before you put it in. You don't have to grease the front, you got to grease the rear. Always grease the shaft before inserting it in the rear end. Where's my grease? I just reorganized. This is the grease I like. RCV synthetic moly grease. I like it because Honda uses moly grease on a lot of the stock splines on the drive shaft, so why would you not use it? Boom, very well greased. You don't want to put any more than that or you won't be able to get the axle in the diff. This stuff's got pretty good water resistance and it's very high pressure grease, so it keeps the splines lasting forever. So on this one, you put the axle back in the diff first. So that's how you get it in right there, just popped right in. If your diff has a lot of wear or rust, you can screw the nut on and do the hammer method on the back to tap it in, but you shouldn't have to really do that. So anyways, one thing I like about this company is if you get a warranty axle from them, they don't mess with sending you some, you know, reman axle. They don't take your old axle and put new inners in the joint or just put new grease and send it back to you and replace the cage. They send you a whole new axle. And that's important to me because I don't care what anybody says about their axle rebuild process, axles wear. This thing might need a new bearing already. We'll have to check when we tighten it down. Axles wear. Anytime you bust a boot and get sand in there, that axle's never going to be the same again. So I like a company that has a more disposable axle. You know, I spend 100 and whatever my discount gets you, 170 bucks on this axle. I break it within a year, I get a brand new axle, I'm good to go. None of this rebuild stuff that's only going to last half as long as the new axle I got. That can be very frustrating. So this is the only tricky part with a lift this big. It's actually kind of hard to get these bolts in. To alleviate that, you can take the shock off and swing it up some, but we're going to try to do it without taking the shock off because we're going to be as lazy as possible. This shock mount looks kind of weird, and that's because this is a rake setup, so you had to move the shock mount back and weld these tabs onto the frame. But the rake is the only way to go if you're going to run a real big or real heavy tire on the Rubicon. It just makes it way more rideable. Or if you're going to ride a passenger or a big heavy cooler, all that kind of stuff, the rake is very, very helpful. So get that in there. Looks like we'll be able to do it. One of these works great. It's Harbor Freight. I don't know what you call this tool, pointy thing with a handle. I guess you could use a chisel too. So you put this in here. If you're interested in who made these arched arms, there is information in the title of this video to contact him. So you don't have to bug me about it, just email the guy. You get that in there. Done. So you literally remove one bolt, one nut, and then one axle nut, and we just changed this damn axle. That's as easy as it gets. And of course, remember to go back and tighten up this top bolt you loosened up. And you want to do that, you want to tighten that up once you're all done and it's at its down travel. That'll help you maintain your clearance and help your bushings last. So that's that. Get our 30mm back on here and tighten the piss out of this axle bolt. Perfect. So you make sure there's no binding and make sure the boot's not rubbing my fancy raked control arms. I don't feel any binding. That feels good, and there's no rubbing. Good to go. Awesome. That is a great axle for the price. Pretty much the best option we have right now. Maybe they'll come out with better ones. Who knows? But I mean, you'll never find me paying $500 an axle for a Rubicon. $250 is about the max I'm going to pay for an axle on a bike that only costs $7,000. And just the idea of spending $500 on an axle that I'm going to eventually tear the boot on and get water in, and then it's just going to be problematic from there on out, doesn't sit well with me. I'd rather have an axle that's decent, but more or less disposable. We get on a pretty good little ride there, like 40 miles an hour. I'm going to check the temperatures. So a little warm to the touch on the inners. If you can put your hand on them, that's usually a pretty good sign. Outers are even colder. Outers not even warm at all. I mean, just barely warm. So you got to break in axles. You got to heat cycle them. So you take it for, you know, a 5-10 minute ride at 40 miles an hour. Let them get warm. Let them get cold. Do that a few times. That's the best way to break in axles. These kind of axles with this heat treatment are pretty good, but like the Turners and the Gorillas and everything like that, which I think are all junk, you got to heat treat them just right to have them have a chance in hell of lasting properly. But this feels fine for a brand new axle. That's just about the right amount of heat, so feels good. So overall, I think these axles installed pretty well. Obviously, we got to test them in some big mud with these big tires.